lucky to be here with the fourth book because I was never sure I was going to actually write it. But when I conceived this Go for Good and Evil, I always thought it was going to be, in my head, my fantasy dream was that it would be 3 different trilogies, kind of like Star Wars. It was a very ambitious 20-something. And I felt like it would be really cool to have the first 3 books be set at the school, have them be like the school years, almost, you know, have this sort of Potter-esque fantasy at a fairy tale school that was darker and weirder, and then not just end when they graduate from school, but then the next 3 books would take place once they leave and they go to their respective kingdoms, because I felt like the one thing missing from kids' literature was my favorite thing reading growing up, even though it was really adult and inappropriate, and my mom knew I shouldn't be reading it. I was really in love with court romance novels, like palace intrigue, and books about like kings and queens like deceiving each other and manipulating each other. And I felt like, why isn't there one of those for kids? There's an obvious answer to that question. I felt like it would be really fun to write one. And I thought, you know, what if that was the next part of the School for Good and Evil series, if I wrote 3 books set at Camelot after they graduate, and we would see what happened. But I never planned to actually write those books for a long, long time. I had started working on a new series about a futuristic television show, and I was halfway through the first book, having a little good time writing it, and then the election happened. And suddenly, all the themes that I had wanted to explore in books 4, 5, 6 down the road suddenly became a lot more relevant. And so I came back to the School for Good and Evil world and slipped right back into it. And writing the 4th book was the most fun of them all, I think, because it felt like I could write a genre that doesn't really exist. I think when you read the 4th book, you'll see something pretty new that feels unlike you know, things you've read before. We're sort of out of the school. Things are different now. I want to thank my editor, Tony Marquis, who is truly amazing. And even though she is still, to this day, very upset with me for making King Arthur a drunk, and so she will one day forgive me for that, and she will forgive me for the fact that lots of little kids around the world will grow up thinking King Arthur was a drunk.
Maybe I won't.
But, or she might not forgive me. So in terms of what the 4th book is about, each book in the School for Good and Evil series tackles a different binary stereotype that I feel like we grow up with, watching Disney movies and watching, you know, sort of conventional fairy tales, and that we get sort of a very clear definition of in these narratives, and we don't really question it. So the first book was about good and evil. The second book was about, anybody remember what the second book was about?
A World Without Princes?
Yeah, but what was the 2 things? Boys and girls. And the second one, what was the 3rd one? Old and young. Does anyone know what the 4th one is yet? Okay, 4th one's Truth and Lies, which dovetails right into what I was talking about with the election. And what I was really curious about was, you know, in the way we accept fairy tales and the way we accept stories in general, is that they are told to us, right? There's always this sort of like creepy, omniscient narrator who seems to know everything that's happening when you read these fairy tales. And as I was starting to write the 4th book, I started questioning what would happen if we started questioning that narrator, right? What if instead of just listening to the story, you're poking at the person telling it? Then all of a sudden, all the things that you've grown up, you know, believing, and all the ways that you enjoy listening to a story start to change, because no longer do you trust the person telling you the story, right? And that's something that not only, you know, our kids dealing with, but now adults are dealing with. And so it was something that I was wrestling with myself with writing the 4th book. So this question of truth and lies is what is all across the 4th book and 5 and 6. I started writing when, I'm trying to think of when I really got into it. I got into it, I think, for sure when I was in 6th grade. I had a teacher named Mrs. Gonzalez who I dedicated the 2nd book to, and she had a Halloween contest where whoever wrote the scariest story that the class voted on would get no homework for a month. And so this idea, for me, everything's about incentive. So if you give me an incentive, I will do it. And so I got really into it. I wrote a murder mystery called Sony Holmes, where I played the detective, and I killed the person who got killed was the person in class who I hated, and everybody else in the class was a suspect. And I got really into writing these stories, and even after the contest, I kept writing them. And she would let me read them on Fridays, like every few Fridays. And the way that people would react, like everyone would be like, I want to die in the next one, or like, I want to be the killer. And so just getting your first audience feedback when you're 12 or 13 years old, that sort of sinks in, and that's what I think turned me into a writer. So to this day, you know, I thank her for just, you know, believing that homework was able to be sacrificed for the Halloween contest. What's next? Yes? This is book 4. As you'll see, there's no way that the end of book 4 is the end. So there's 2 more coming, book 5 and book 6, which is going to be the complete Camelot Years trilogy, which is why on the spine of the book you have that little gold coin that says the Camelot Years. So you'll have 2 separate trilogies, the school years and the Camelot Years, and then I will be done with the School for Good and Evil for a while because I have something else I would like to do, which will also be hopefully a book series. Anybody else? Yeah?
How did you get the title name?
How do I come up with the title names? That's a good question. It's like same thing with the character names. I don't know, I just sort of feel it, and if I don't feel it, then I just sort of wait until it comes. I'm trying to think if there were any that were really difficult. School for Good and Evil came instantly. Though originally it was just called the School for Evil. And then, I don't know, for some reason I realized I should put the other school in there. And then, Roll Without Princess came really easy. Last Ever After was hard. That took a while. Quest for Glory came instantly. Though there was a lot of debate between me and Tony over whether it's Quest for Glory or Quests for Glory. And you'll see why it's plural. And then we have a title for the 5th book, which I'm not going to tell you. My thesis, okay, so I wrote my thesis on, at Harvard on what makes wicked women so compelling in terms of reinventing them throughout time, and what makes them such sort of seminal villains in fairy tale culture. Often you'll see more female villains than male villains in fairy tale culture, and it's usually because male villains come often from an angle of brute strength, and female villains have to operate with a lot more sort of subterfuge and seduction and deceit and all sorts of cool, interesting character quirks that make them more fun to read about. And also, the scariest thing to a kid is an unmaternal female villain. Like a female, like a woman who hates children and would rather like kill them for money than like be a mom. And so like that's the one thing that's all across fairy tales. It's what makes Hansel and Gretel so scary, right? The mother's all of a sudden like, we can't afford a kid, so throw them out, right? So that's what the thesis was about. Where can you read it? My mom has a copy somewhere in the house. So, you know, I'm trying to think if there might be one at the Harvard Archives, maybe. Yeah. So the thing with the School for Good and Evil is that I never outline, I never plan the story ahead, because most of the reason I write is because I'm figuring everything out while I do it. So if somebody dies or something terrible happens, it's happening to me at the same time, and I'm sort of figuring it out as it happens. And I think that's the reason I write, is because it's the only way I know how to express myself. I wish I was a more sort of like, you know, verbal, outgoing person who could like be on, you know, America's Next Top Model or something. That's not gonna happen. So until the day I die, I'll be a writer because that's what keeps me sane.
The war, everyone saved her turned into butterflies. Did she actually die, or did she go somewhere else?
Oh God. This is the problem. When you get further on in the series, I have no idea what happened in books before. Like I forget. Like, people tell me things all the time, and I'm like, did I really write that? No, I think she's dead, as far as I know. Okay, she's not dead. Everything's fine. I knew that was a trap question. I should have just avoided answering that one.
So with your writing style, the way you describe it, what has been the most shocking development you've ever written in a story that you weren't prepared for?
This one, in 4, everyone knows somebody dies, because somebody always dies. But this was tough, because I remember talking to Tony about it, that I was like, I wrote it and kept thinking that there was some way around it, that I didn't have to have it happen. But I think that was it. Like, whenever a character dies, I don't see it coming usually. It usually happens in a moment, which is a very weird way to write, because most writers really do know somebody's going to die, but not for me. I think it's because I can't admit it to myself. If I know someone's going to die, I'll therefore write less of them, because it'll be painful. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to write a character that I'm in love with knowing they're going to die soon. So then I think my subconscious surprises me. which is depressing.
Why this age group? Why are the books for this age group?
Oh boy. I didn't think it was going to be for this age group. I thought it was for adults. I honestly sold it thinking it was for adults. And then when we sold it, they were like, oh, this is great for like 9 to 13-year-olds. And I was like, okay, apparently my writing style is like, the equivalent of Taylor Swift. But honestly, the truth is, I think this age is where I honestly think people are the smartest in their lives. Like the way kids from, between 9 and like 15 can sort of pick things up and keep the complexity in their heads. I mean, the way all of you guys who have read all the books in the series can keep everything in your heads. We adults can't do that anymore, so we lose that ability. So I just love the enthusiasm, I love the lack of cynicism, I love how passionate they are about books and stories and characters. I don't think everyone's always like, will you write like a YA teenage series? And I don't think so, because teenagers are just so morose. And I feel like writing for kids is always super fun. That said, the books do grow with each one, so they're getting older. So, how many of you have read all the books, like including the handbook? Who started reading them like right when the first book came out, like one at a time? So some of you started when you were like 8 or 9 and are now how old?
I'm 15. I started writing when I was like 9.
Okay, so there we go. So some people started when they were young, and that's my goal, is to write a series that you can grow up with. So the 8-year-old starting with book 4, we'll see. That's good.
You're gonna write small children.
Small children's book, there's children. That's if I'm gonna write kids for small children, because also all my friends are having babies now. I don't know how, because I tend to write really subversive, like dark, transgressive, provocative things, and I don't know how I would do that with a picture book without getting a mob after me in the middle of it. But I'm sure it'll happen at some point, because I would love to write a picture book. So the inevitable movie question that I will try to answer without letting out a primal scream. Universal has the rights to it. They've had it for a while. The problem with studio movies is it's a bit like trying to get a bill through Congress, right? Without sort of like pressure on them to make it in any given time, it just moves very, very slowly. So we finally have a script that everybody loves. We're trying to get a director on that the studio approves of. At the same time, the movie industry is not going through its best time in the world. So things are just moving slowly. So it will happen. When it happens, it will be amazing. In the meantime, I made the countdown videos casting exactly who I would cast if I was making the movie myself. So now you guys have a very clear picture of what I would want the movie to be. And if it was up to me, you would all give me money and I'd go make the movie myself right now. And we wouldn't have to deal with the studio. Just like we wouldn't have to deal with Congress. So, we'll see. The movie will happen at some point, I promise. But in the meantime, I mean, the truth is, the books are really big, right? So no movie is going to be able to get everything in the book. So no matter what the movie is, everyone's going to complain anyway. So enjoy the books while you have them. Oh God, the question of how old Sophie and Agatha are. And I never tell, because my thing with fairy tales is you never know how old anybody is in a fairy tale. Because the whole point of the fairy tale, when the Grimm's brothers wrote them down and other writers, is that they were meant to be survival guides to life for every age. So they never specified age, specifically so that everyone would think it was their age. So when people read book 1 of School for Good and Evil, I used to get letters of people thinking that Sophie and Agatha were 16. I used to get people thinking they were 9, which is weird. But everyone thought they were their age, which is what I want. I mean, Tedros, at some point, I had to specify his age in order to, make things happen. But Sophie and Agatha, I wanted to keep a mystery. A couple more, and then we'll get to What other books inspired me to write besides Harry Potter? What's funny is I didn't read kids' books growing up at all. Because that whole genre didn't really exist. Potter sort of gave all of us jobs. Like, none of us who are here at Books of Wonder, like giving our presentations, would be here without Potter, because it launched a whole new industry. The idea of like a 700 page book for kids that can work for teenagers and adults was non-existent. So when I was your age, I didn't read kids' books at all. I was reading, I was obsessed with vampire novels, so I read a lot of Anne Rice, which again, my mom thought was the most inappropriate thing she'd ever heard of in her entire life. But, you know, she was like, who thinks he's reading? So, what would I suggest for an aspiring writer? How many of you want to be writers when you grow up or have a desire to write? Just meeting a lot of you readers, you know, here and elsewhere. Is I just feel like the cool thing about the School for Good and Evil series is it's become a series for smart kids. Like whenever anybody asks who the demographic of the series is, I just unabashedly be like, smart kids. So if your kid is not smart, they won't like it. Which is such an elitist thing to say, but I feel like you're all here, so it's fine. Advice. The advice I would say is, and it's the one thing that I think always guides me whenever I do anything, is that if anybody else can do the story, then I don't do it. Like, if it's a story that anybody else, I could pass on to a better writer, and they could write the story, you know, just as well as I could or better, then I have no interest in it. It has to be specific to me. You know, in this case, the idea of a Harry Potter-esque fantasy set in a warped Disney world, because I was, you know, brainwashed by Disney growing up, in a warped Disney world that revolved around like a weird romantic triangle that had like a mix of like Disney, Hunger Games, and Madonna, was just like very much like only something I could do. Do you know what I mean? So I felt like it was a specific story. So that's how I would say. Pick a story that's unique to you.
Who come up with the names?
The names of the characters, I just sort of feel them. It's like naming a pet. You know, and the funny thing is I never changed them. I've never changed the character's name. Like Hort, the moment I thought of the character, I was like, Hort. You know what I mean? Like I just sort of feel it. Same with the kingdom names. So if I ever don't, this is just between you and me. If I don't know what to name a character, I steal a name of a professional tennis player. Why, if any of you are tennis fans, especially in the fourth book, you will notice a lot of professional tennis players. All right, one more.